The life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. These stark words, penned by Thomas Hobbes in his monumental work, Leviathan, cast a chilling shadow over our understanding of humanity. He forces us to confront a profound and unsettling truth about ourselves and the very foundation of society. Imagine, if you will, a world devoid of laws, of government, of any overarching power to maintain order. What would truly remain of us? Hobbes asserts it would be a state of perpetual conflict, a war of every person against every other person. In this primal condition, what Hobbes calls the state of nature, there is no industry, no culture, no navigation, no knowledge, no arts, no letters, no society. Why? Because the fruits of any labor would be uncertain, constantly under threat of being taken by another. The inherent equality of individuals, he argues, leads not to harmony, but to rivalry. We are all equally capable of desiring the same things, and equally capable of destroying each other to get them. Our nature drives us by three fundamental passions: competition for gain, diffidence for safety, and glory for reputation. These forces, unchecked, plunge us into an inescapable cycle of fear and violence. So, is human nature inherently evil, or simply chaotic? Hobbes suggests it's not necessarily malice that drives us, but a relentless pursuit of self-preservation and advantage. In the absence of a common power to hold us all in awe, our fear of death and our desire for comfort compel us to distrust, to preempt, and ultimately, to dominate. There is no right or wrong in this state, no justice or injustice, for without law, these concepts simply do not exist. Force and fraud become the cardinal virtues. Consider your own actions: locking your doors at night, securing your possessions, even carrying a weapon in dangerous places. Hobbes would argue that these everyday precautions, even within a governed society, reveal our underlying suspicion of our fellow humans, confirming his grim assessment of our natural inclinations. This is the brutal reality from which we must escape. How then do we transcend this terrifying existence? Hobbes provides the answer through the creation of the Leviathan. This is his name for the absolute sovereign power, an artificial man, a necessary monster. It is a government so powerful, so awe-inspiring, that it can impose peace, enforce laws, and protect us from ourselves. Only by surrendering some of our natural liberty to this formidable entity can we achieve security, establish justice, and build a society where life is not, in fact, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. This Leviathan, born of our collective fear and our rational desire for a better life, is the only bulwark against the inherent chaos of the human condition. Welcome, and thank you for joining me on this profound intellectual journey. As your guide through Thomas Hobbes's monumental work, Leviathan, I invite you to step back with me into a truly turbulent chapter of human history, a time when the very foundations of society felt profoundly under siege. To truly grasp the essence of Hobbes's towering philosophy, we must first immerse ourselves in the world that shaped him, a world steeped in a specific, palpable fear that resonated deeply through the 17th century. Imagine, for a moment, England in the mid-1600s. It was an era of unprecedented upheaval, a nation ripped apart by the brutal, bloody conflict of the English Civil War. Brother fought brother, the crown battled parliament, and the constant specter of violence, anarchy, and untimely death loomed over every life. This wasn't merely a period of political disagreement, it was a fundamental breakdown of order, a terrifying vacuum where no established authority could reliably guarantee safety or peace. Thomas Hobbes lived through this crucible of chaos, witnessing firsthand the devastating consequences when human beings are left without a strong, unified governing power. This profound observation, this deep-seated, ever-present fear of social collapse, and the resulting war of all against all, became the singular driving force behind his most revolutionary and enduring ideas. From this backdrop of intense political and social turmoil, Hobbes conceived of a radical and meticulously crafted solution, the creation of what he boldly termed an artificial man, the Commonwealth, or the state. He viewed this complex political body not as a natural organism, but as a magnificent, intricate, man-made mechanism, designed explicitly to overcome the inherent dangers of human nature and ensure collective survival. Much like God, through art and design, created and governs the natural world. Hobbes believed that humanity, through its own art and reason, could construct an artificial system to govern itself, ensuring a life beyond constant strife and the fear of violent death. Our illuminating path through Leviathan will meticulously mirror Hobbes's own rigorous construction. We will begin by looking deeply inward, examining the fundamental nature of man himself, our individual senses, our intricate thoughts, our powerful passions, and the very limits and capabilities of our reason. For Hobbes posited, with unwavering conviction, that to truly understand the vast, artificial body of the state, we must first deeply comprehend the matter from which it is made, and the artificer who skillfully creates it, and both, ultimately, are us. We will explore how individuals, driven by their compelling desires and their innate, potent fear of death, come together, however reluctantly, to form societies. Following this foundational understanding of human nature, we will then meticulously trace the crucial steps involved in creating this artificial sovereign power. We'll investigate the specific covenants, or agreements, that bind individuals into a cohesive collective, and crucially the essential rights, the just power, and the immense authority that must be granted to a sovereign ruler for true peace and enduring security to flourish. This is where Hobbes unveils his vision of an almost absolute power, a necessary unwavering bulwark against the ever-present threat of disorder and civil strife. Finally, we will consider, with his keen insight, what factors work to preserve this mighty structure, enabling it to endure through time, and conversely, what internal weaknesses or external forces might ultimately lead to its dissolution, tragically plunging humanity back into that dreaded, brutal state of nature. Prepare yourself, for this is not merely a historical document, but a stark, often challenging, yet profoundly relevant exploration of power, fear, and the enduring human quest for order and lasting peace. Welcome to our exploration of Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, a foundational work in political philosophy, but one that begins not with governments, but with man himself. To understand society, Hobbes argues, we must first understand the individual, and he presents a radical, mechanistic view of human nature. Imagine a finely crafted machine, a clock perhaps, with its intricate springs, gears, and levers. Hobbes asks us to consider the human body in much the same way. What is the heart? He proposes but a spring. What are the nerves but so many strings or wires? And our joints, merely wheels, all working together to give motion to the entire body, just as a master artisan intended. From this perspective, our very life is simply the motion of limbs, originating from a core internal mechanism. We are, in essence, an artificial animal, a complex automaton. Now, how does this human machine interact with the world around it? Through what Hobbes calls sense. When we perceive anything, a sight, a sound, a touch, we often think of it as something distinct, something out there. But for Hobbes, sense is far more fundamental and physical. It's nothing more than the impact of an external body upon our own. Consider the objects around you. They exert pressure on your sensory organs. For instance, light waves press upon your eyes, sound waves upon your ears, and physical objects press directly upon your skin when you touch them. This external pressure isn't just an external event, it initiates a chain reaction. This motion, this pressure, travels inwards, through your nerves and other physical structures, all the way to your brain and heart. It's this internal resistance, this counterpressure within you, that creates the appearance of something external, that outward seeming which we interpret as the sensation itself. Every quality we perceive, color, sound, taste, warmth, is, in its essence, merely a different kind of motion of matter. And within us, the act of sensing is also nothing more than these various motions playing out internally. Motion, in this materialist universe, produces nothing but motion. But what happens when that external object is removed? Does the sensation immediately vanish? Hobbes says no. Think of a stone thrown into water. The ripples continue to spread and move long after the stone has sunk from sight. In the same way, the internal motions caused by our senses do not instantly cease. They linger, the internal motions continuing within your brain and heart, gradually fading over time. This lingering, decaying sense is what Hobbes terms imagination. It's the residual echo of a physical impact that has since passed. When we recall an image or a sound, we are simply experiencing a weakening, internal motion that was once a vivid, immediate sensation. If this fading sense is old, and we consciously recognize it as a past experience, we then give it the specific name of memory. So, in Hobbes' view, imagination and memory are not separate faculties, but rather two names for the very same phenomenon, the decay of a past sense, a fading internal motion. This process occurs in all living creatures, whether awake or asleep. So, from the intricate mechanics of our body to the very fabric of our perceptions and thoughts, Hobbes presents a relentlessly materialist view. Man is a machine, responding to the motions of the world with his own internal motions. Our experiences, our senses, and even our imagination are all products of this grand, mechanical interplay. In this chapter, we explore the extraordinary human invention of speech and its inherent dangers. Hobbes posits that of all human discoveries, none is more noble or beneficial than language. It is through speech that we transform our fleeting thoughts into lasting records, marking them with names to be recalled at will. This allows us to register our own understanding and communicate it to others, sharing our conceptions, wishes, and purposes. Consider the alternative: without speech, there would be no commonwealth, no society, no contracts, no peace. Humanity would be indistinguishable from the beasts, lions, bears, or wolves living in constant strife. Speech is the foundational tool that enables us to construct civilization, to give counsel, to teach, to command, and to forge agreements that bind us together. However, this powerful instrument is also prone to significant misuse. Hobbes identifies 4 primary abuses of speech, each capable of sowing discord and confusion. First, we abuse language when we use words not to signify our own genuine understanding, but merely to echo the ideas of others, believing we grasp what they mean when we do not. We pretend to knowledge we lack. Second, and highly perilous, is the metaphorical use of language. This occurs when words are employed in a sense other than their original, intended meaning. While metaphor has a place in poetry, in serious discourse, it becomes an instrument of deceit, obscuring truth rather than revealing it. The third abuse arises when we declare something to be our will through words when, in truth, our intentions are contrary. This is the essence of hypocrisy, where language becomes a mask for insincerity. Finally, the fourth abuse is using words to cause harm. Nature arms creatures with teeth and claws for defense. Yet, humanity, gifted with reason, can wield words to inflict wounds more safely, and often more deeply than any physical weapon, turning dialogue into conflict. This brings us to the critical importance of definitions. For Hobbes, truth resides in the proper ordering of names within our affirmations. Anyone seeking precise truth must diligently remember what each word they use truly stands for. Otherwise, our reasoning becomes flawed, our conclusions absurd. Words, Hobbes suggests, are like counters in an accounting ledger. Wise individuals use them to calculate and arrive at precise sums. But for fools, these words are like money itself, valued not by their true denomination but by the authority of those who utter them, be it an Aristotle or another esteemed figure. Valuing words by authority rather than by defined meaning inevitably leads to error. The most common source of absurd conclusions, Hobbes asserts, is a lack of method in reasoning, specifically, failing to begin with clear definitions. Without a defined foundation, any intellectual structure we attempt to build will collapse into nonsense. When a person employs a name they cannot define, or one not universally understood in the same sense, they are akin to someone using a coin of unknown value. Such terms lead to what Hobbes calls insignificant names or meaningless speech, fundamental flaws that corrupt all subsequent reasoning. Therefore, definitions are the very entrance to all knowledge. They are the fixed points from which we embark on any journey of understanding. Without them, our thoughts become a chaotic jumble, easily swayed by rhetoric or misinterpretation. Neglecting to define our terms creates fertile ground for conflict, as individuals attach different meanings to the same words, leading to endless, irresolvable disputes. To escape this linguistic trap and ascend to true knowledge, we must meticulously establish precise, agreed-upon definitions. Only then can we ensure our reasoning is sound, our agreements clear, and our pursuit of truth steadfast. freeing us from the absurdity that arises when words lose their anchor in shared reality. Welcome to Chapter 3, Driven by Desire. Here, we delve into the very springs of human action, uncovering the fundamental forces that compel us, from our simplest impulses to our grandest ambitions. To understand human society, we must first understand the individual, and particularly, what moves them. Our lives are filled with motion. Some are involuntary, like the beating of our hearts or our breathing, occurring without conscious thought. Others are voluntary, such as walking or speaking. Every chosen action originates from a thought, an image, or an idea in our minds. Our mind sketches the action, and our body follows. These internal stirrings, these beginnings of motion before visible action, Hobbes calls endeavor. When this internal push is towards something, when we are drawn to an object or idea, we call it appetite or desire. Appetite is a leaning, desire, a stronger longing. Both signify this movement of approach, this seeking out. Conversely, when our internal endeavor is directed away from something, when we wish to retreat or avoid it, we call this aversion. Just as appetite draws us in, aversion pushes us away. All our voluntary actions fundamentally break down into these two primal movements, moving towards desire or away from aversion. From this understanding of appetite and aversion, a profound truth about human values emerges. What is good and evil? Hobbes argues these terms are not absolute or inherent in nature. Instead, what a person desires, the object of their appetite, they call good. What they are averse to, they call evil. And what they hold in contempt, they deem inconsequential. These words are always relative to the individual. There is no universal scale of good or evil in objects themselves. Without a governing body, each person defines these values. In a commonwealth, the ruling authority or an arbiter sets the rule. This subjectivity means one person's greatest good might be another's deepest evil. And so, we arrive at one of Hobbes's most famous observations. Given our actions are desire-driven, what is our most fundamental desire? Hobbes posits a perpetual and restless desire of power after power, ceasing only in death. This isn't just a craving for more pleasure, but a deeper insecurity. One cannot guarantee their current means to live well without constantly acquiring more power. Without increasing influence or resources, one risks losing what they possess, and thus their ability to live securely. Even those with immense power, like kings, are never satisfied. They secure their power at home through laws, abroad through wars. Then, new desires emerge: fame from conquests, ease and pleasure, or admiration for their skills. This endless quest for more is not mere avarice, but a fundamental mechanism for self-preservation. It's a deep-seated human trait, driven by life's uncertainty and the need to secure present and future well-being. This cycle only ceases when life ends. Imagine, if you will, a world stripped bare of all civil society and law, where each individual is left solely to their own devices. This is what we call the state of nature. Nature, in its fundamental design, has created human beings with a remarkable equality in their physical and mental capacities. While one person may be visibly stronger than another, or possess a quicker mind, these differences are not so profound as to give anyone an absolute advantage. For instance, even the physically weakest among us has sufficient strength, perhaps through secret machination or by joining forces with others, to kill the strongest. And as for our mental faculties, I believe that what we perceive as wisdom is often gained through equal experience and diligent application, rather than inherent genius. Indeed, it is a rare individual who doesn't believe themselves to be wiser than most others, or at least wiser than the common sort, unless they acknowledge the wisdom of a few whom they hold in high esteem. This widespread belief in one's own wisdom is merely another testament to our underlying equality. From this basic equality of ability arises an equality of hope in achieving our goals. If two individuals desire the very same thing, something they cannot both possess, they inevitably become enemies. In their pursuit, each will strive to destroy or subdue the other. And when an invader has little more to fear than one person's isolated power, if successful in taking another's possessions, they, in turn, must expect new threats from others who will come to dispossess them. Because of this constant vulnerability, there is no better way for any person to secure themselves than to anticipate and act first. either by force or cunning, to dominate as many others as possible, until they see no further power that could threaten them. This is merely self-preservation, and it is considered permissible. Moreover, men find no pleasure in keeping company where there is no power to overawe them all. When we meet without a common authority, we are naturally suspicious of one another, each expecting the other to value themselves as highly as we value ourselves, and to use any means to achieve their ends. From this inherent suspicion and constant competition, three principal causes of quarrel emerge in the nature of man. The first is competition. This leads men to invade for gain. The second is diffidence, or fear. This prompts men to invade for safety. And the third is glory. This causes men to invade for reputation. So, in the state of nature, the first group uses violence to make themselves masters of other men's persons, wives, children, and cattle. The second group uses it to defend these things. And the third group uses it for trifles, for a word, a smile, a differing opinion, or any other sign of undervalue, either directly towards their person, or by reflection upon their family, friends, nation, profession, or name. It is clear then, that during the entire time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, they are in that condition which is called war. And such a war is not merely between 2 or 3 individuals, but is a war of every man against every man. Now, war, in this sense, does not consist solely in actual battle or the act of fighting. Rather, it exists throughout any period when the will to contend by battle is sufficiently known. It is like the weather, for just as foul weather does not mean continuous rain, but rather a known disposition for rain over a period of many days, so the nature of war consists not in actual fighting, but in the manifest tendency towards it. Therefore, any time frame where men have no security beyond their own strength and invention, we are in a state of war. In such a state, the consequences are severe. There is no place for industry, because the fruit of it is uncertain. Consequently, there is no cultivation of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that can be imported by sea. There are no commodious buildings, no instruments for moving and removing things that require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society. And, worst of all, there is continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man becomes solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. To this war of every man against every man, it is also a consequence that nothing can be unjust. The notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice, have no place there. Where there is no common power, there is no law. And where there is no law, there is no injustice. Force and fraud are the 2 cardinal virtues in war. Furthermore, there is no property, no dominion, no distinct concept of mine and thine, but only that which every man can get, and for as long as he can keep it. And this is the miserable condition humanity is cast into by mere notu.re, before any form of government or law comes into being. In the ongoing human struggle for survival, reason emerges as our most crucial guide. It's the faculty that compels us to navigate away from the grim reality of the state of nature, a condition Hobbes describes as one where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and indeed, very short. To truly grasp how reason illuminates the path out of such chaos, we must first understand the crucial distinction between what we are permitted to do and what we are obligated to do for the sake of our own enduring preservation. First, let's consider the right of nature, or jus naturale. This is the fundamental liberty each person possesses to use their own power in any way they deem necessary for the preservation of their own life. It means you are free to do anything that, in your judgment and reason, you believe is the most effective means to secure your survival. In a world without common authority, this right is absolute. You have the liberty to act on every impulse, to take what you need, and to defend yourself by any means. This unbridled freedom, while perhaps alluring in its absoluteness, is precisely what traps humanity in the perpetual state of war. For when every individual possesses this expansive right to all things, and to every person, there can be no security, only constant conflict and mutual threat. But reason doesn't stop there. It also reveals a different kind of directive, the law of nature, or lex naturalis. Unlike a right, which is a liberty to do or not to do. A law is a precept or a general rule, discovered by reason, that forbids you from doing anything destructive to your life, or from taking away the means to preserve it. Conversely, it commands you to do whatever you think will best preserve your life. To be clear, a right gives you the freedom to act or to refrain from acting, while a law specifically determines and binds you to one course of action. They are, in essence, as fundamentally different as liberty and obligation, and regarding the same specific matter, these two concepts are inherently inconsistent. From this vital distinction emerges the first, and most fundamental, law of nature. Reason compels every person to endeavor peace, as far as they have hope of obtaining it. When peace is unattainable, then, and only then, may one seek and use all the advantages of war for self-defense. The fundamental law of nature, the primary directive derived from human reason, is simply this: to seek peace and follow it. This command arises from the undeniable truth that peace offers the only truly reliable and enduring path to self-preservation, starkly contrasting with the constant peril and exhaustion inherent in perpetual conflict. Reason shows us that war, while sometimes necessary for immediate defense, can never be a sustainable state for long-term survival. While the right of nature allows us to defend ourselves by all means, the first law of nature directs us to first exhaust all possibilities for a peaceful existence. Building upon this foundational principle of seeking peace, we arrive at the second law of nature. This law dictates that a person should be willing to lay down their right to all things, and be content with only as much liberty against other people as they would allow other people against themselves. However, this willingness is conditional. It only applies if others are willing to do the same. The reason for this is clear. As long as everyone insists on their absolute right to everything, the state of war persists. But if others refuse to reciprocate, there is no rational reason for any individual to disarm themselves or give up their rights. To do so would not be a step towards peace, but rather a foolish act of self-sacrifice, exposing oneself to others as an easy prey. No rational person is bound to accept such a vulnerable position. Thus, the surrender of these absolute rights must be a perfectly mutual act, a collective agreement where all parties simultaneously reduce their individual liberty for the greater, shared good of universal peace and mutual preservation. Having explored the fundamental laws of nature, which command us to seek peace and lay down our rights, we now turn to the critical mechanism by which humanity truly escapes the perpetual war of all against all. This is the very essence of the social contract, the foundation of any enduring commonwealth. Imagine a group of people agreeing to live by certain rules, driven by a shared desire for safety. They make promises to each other, vows to abstain from harming one another. But what ensures these agreements hold firm when self-interest inevitably resurfaces? What truly guarantees that these covenants will be honored when personal advantage beckons, or fear suggests betrayal? Hobbes presents a stark, yet profoundly realistic insight. Covenants, without the sword, are but words. Think of it. Without some tangible, awe-inspiring power to enforce them, promises are flimsy. They are easily broken by the lure of immediate gain or the constant suspicion of others. In the absence of a common power, individual passions, ambition, and fear will lead individuals to violate their agreements. A contract, however well-intended, is merely an abstract concept until backed by the credible threat of punishment for its violation. Without this sword, this common power, the natural human inclination towards self-preservation, which often manifests as a desire for power, would quickly dissolve any agreements. Peace, therefore, cannot simply be wished into existence. It must be actively and powerfully enforced. This brings us to the crucial act of establishing a commonwealth. For people to live securely, protected from both foreign invaders and internal strife, they must collectively take a decisive and irreversible step. They must unite and transfer all their individual power and strength to a single, sovereign authority. This is a profound and mutual transfer of rights. Every individual agrees to lay down their right to govern themselves, their right to use force as they see fit, and their right to judge what is right and wrong, surrendering these to this new central power. Consider this not as a burden, but as a release from unbearable anxiety. By giving up some absolute freedoms, which in the state of nature offered no security, they gain the far more valuable freedom of security and the opportunity for industry and prosperity. This grand transfer is a voluntary, rational choice made by each person, driven by the desire to escape the misery and danger of the state of nature. The sovereign power is thereby constituted, endowed with enough absolute authority to compel obedience and maintain peace among all. Now, a common misconception arises here. It's vital to understand precisely who the parties to this contract are. This social contract, this momentous agreement, is not made between the subjects and the sovereign. The sovereign is not a party to the contract. Instead, the contract is made amongst the subjects themselves. Each person makes a covenant with every other person, agreeing to authorize and uphold the actions of a single man or assembly. The sovereign, whether a monarch or an assembly, is the result of this agreement, the entity created by it. The sovereign is the beneficiary of the transfer of rights, but crucially, not a participant in the act of transferring. This distinction is paramount, for it means that because the sovereign is not party to the original contract, they cannot breach it. Their power is absolute precisely because it is granted by the unanimous consent of the people for their own protection. Their authority is established by the contract, not subject to it. This structure fundamentally means that the sovereign's actions are, by definition, considered the authorized actions of all subjects, because each subject has empowered them. To rebel against the sovereign, therefore, is to rebel against oneself, against the very authority one has chosen to create for one's own security. It is to break the covenant made with every other citizen, plunging all back into the terrifying chaos of the state of nature. Thus, the enduring strength of the Commonwealth rests on this foundational understanding: the sword is essential, the transfer of rights is mutual and absolute, and the contract is forged among individuals to create a common power above them all. We've explored the stark reality of humanity without a guiding hand. Now let's envision the path to lasting peace. Hobbes argues the only way to forge a protective common power, one strong enough to shield us from invaders and internal strife, allowing us to live contentedly, is through a profound act of collective will. This involves conferring all individual power and strength upon one man, or an assembly of men. Through this conferral, the diverse wills of the multitude are reduced, by majority vote, into one unified will. Essentially, it means appointing a person, or body, to embody everyone. Each individual then acknowledges themselves as the true author of every action this chosen person performs, concerning public peace and safety. In this pivotal moment, every person agrees to submit their will to his, and their private judgments to his public judgment. This is more than agreement. It's a fundamental, real unity of every individual within a single shared person. This unity is forged through a covenant, a solemn agreement made by every man with every other man. Imagine each person saying to their neighbor, "I authorize and surrender my right to govern myself to this man or assembly, on the condition that you, too, surrender your right to him, and authorize all his actions in the same manner." Once this covenant is made, this multitude, now truly united in one singular person, becomes what we call a commonwealth, in Latin civitas. This, dear listener, is the very generation of that great Leviathan, or, to speak reverently, of that mortal god. To this earthly deity, we owe, beneath the immortal God, our enduring peace and our very defense. Through this authority, granted to him by every individual, the sovereign gains an immense reservoir of power and strength. The terror of this power enables him to mold and direct his subjects' wills towards domestic peace, and to marshal their mutual aid against external enemies. The very essence of the Commonwealth resides in him. Succinctly, the Commonwealth is one person, whose acts a great multitude, through mutual covenants, have made themselves each the author. Its ultimate purpose is for that person to utilize collective strength and resources as he deems expedient, solely for their peace and common defense. The individual who embodies and carries this artificial person is designated the sovereign. He is understood to possess what we term sovereign power. Conversely, every other person within this construct is known as his subject. The efficacy of this sovereign power hinges entirely on its absolute nature. For if the sovereign were to possess less than absolute authority, if any individual or group retained the right to challenge or refuse his decrees, the Commonwealth would immediately dissolve back into the chaotic state of nature. The very purpose of creating this mortal god is to escape perpetual war. Any division of its power would render it impotent, unable to enforce the laws, settle disputes, or defend against aggression. Thus, for the Commonwealth to fulfill its purpose to provide peace and security, the sovereign's power must remain indivisible and supreme, the ultimate arbiter of all matters, beyond challenge or debate. Only then can the scattered wills of humanity truly coalesce into a unified force for collective good and lasting stability. Welcome back as we delve into Chapter 8, exploring the indispensable rights of the ruler, a concept central to the stability of any commonwealth. These powers, as we shall see, are not arbitrary, but are absolutely essential for the preservation of peace and order within society. First among these vital rights is the sovereign's authority over public doctrines and what may be openly spoken or published. Hobbes argues that men's actions stem from their opinions. Therefore, if the Commonwealth is to maintain peace, the sovereign must be the judge of which ideas contribute to harmony and which threaten to sow discord. This means deciding who can speak to large gatherings, what they can say, and even controlling the publication of books to prevent the spread of seditious beliefs. It's a necessary measure to ensure that peace, the ultimate goal, is not undermined by conflicting or dangerous doctrines. Moving beyond public discourse, consider the administration of justice. The sovereign holds the ultimate judiciary power, settling all controversies concerning law, property, contract, and crime. Without a final, unquestionable arbiter, disputes would quickly escalate into conflict, plunging society back into a state of war. Therefore, the sovereign, or those appointed by them, must be the supreme judge, interpreting laws and ensuring their fair and consistent enforcement. This singular power is crucial for defining what is right and wrong, what is owned and what is not, thereby providing the clear framework for peaceful coexistence. Furthermore, the sovereign alone possesses the right to declare war and make peace with other nations. This includes determining the timing and necessity of conflict, commanding the armed forces, and levying taxes to fund these crucial endeavors. To allow individual subjects, or even smaller groups within the Commonwealth, to decide on matters of war and peace would invite chaos, internal division, and external vulnerability. This singular power ensures a united defense and a coherent foreign policy, safeguarding the entire community from outside threats. Now, it's crucial to understand why the sovereign cannot be justly accused of injustice or forfeit their power. Recall that the subjects, by their original covenant, authorized every action the sovereign undertakes. Each citizen effectively made themselves the author of the sovereign's acts. Therefore, to complain of injury from the sovereign is to complain of an act of which you yourself are the author, which, logically, is impossible. Since no man can injure himself, the sovereign, acting with the authority of all, cannot injure any subject in a legal sense. Moreover, the covenant that established the sovereign was made between subjects with each other, not directly between subjects and the sovereign. The sovereign is not bound by a covenant to the subjects, in a way that could be broken. Thus, there is no basis for subjects to claim the sovereign has forfeited power, nor can they be freed from their allegiance on such grounds. The power, once granted, remains absolute and indissoluble. Finally, Hobbes delivers a stark warning against any attempt to divide sovereign power. He argues emphatically that a divided power is a destroyed power. If the legislative authority is separated from the executive, or the power to tax from the power to command the military, or if there is any other legitimate power not ultimately derived from the sovereign, then you effectively create two competing sovereigns. This inevitably leads to conflict, as these divided powers will constantly clash. Such a division, much like a body torn asunder, cannot long endure and will inevitably dissolve the Commonwealth, leading back to the dreadful state of nature. For a Commonwealth to stand strong and secure, its highest authority must remain undivided and supreme, the ultimate guarantee of public peace and safety. Welcome to a deeper exploration of society, where we confront the challenging notion of freedom under an absolute power. In the previous chapters, we established the necessity of a sovereign authority to escape the brutal state of nature. Now, we turn our attention to the individual, asking, what does liberty truly look like when we live under the watchful eye of the Leviathan? To understand this, we must first redefine liberty itself, stripping away our modern assumptions. For our purposes, liberty simply means the absence of physical opposition. Imagine a stone lying freely on the ground. It is at liberty to remain there, for nothing external is stopping its resting state. However, if a wall stands in its way, it is not at liberty to move forward. This principle applies equally to a rational creature. A free person, therefore, is someone who, in those things they are able to do by their strength and intellect, is not hindered from doing what they truly intend. Now, consider our commonwealth. When we formed this artificial person, the sovereign, we also forged artificial chains, our civil laws. These laws, though necessary for peace and self-preservation, are designed to bind us. They are the limits we accept in exchange for safety. So, where does liberty fit into this structure? The liberty of a subject lies precisely in those actions that the sovereign has chosen not to regulate. It exists in the silence of the law. Where the law is quiet, there is freedom. This means we are free to buy and sell goods, to enter into contracts with one another, to choose our own home, our own diet, and our own profession. We are free to raise our children as we see fit, and to engage in many other activities that the sovereign has not specifically forbidden. These are the spaces of personal discretion, left open by design, or sometimes by mere omission. Yet, there is a fundamental and inalienable right that no subject can ever truly surrender, even in the act of covenanting to obey a sovereign power. This is the right to self-preservation, the most basic instinct for survival. While we give up many liberties for peace, we cannot genuinely be understood to have given up the right to defend our own life from immediate, mortal danger. No one can willingly covenant to wound or kill themselves. Therefore, if a sovereign, or an officer acting on their behalf, commands a subject to kill, wound, or maim themselves, that subject retains the liberty to disobey. Likewise, if commanded not to resist those who assault them, or to abstain from food, medicine, or other means by which they might preserve their life, the subject is at liberty to refuse. This also extends to the refusal to confess a crime if no witnesses exist to prove it, for such a confession would directly lead to their own death or harm. It is crucial to understand that this liberty is not a right to defy the sovereign's authority or a just judgment. If a subject is lawfully condemned to death, the sovereign has the right to execute that sentence. However, the subject is not obliged to actively assist in their own execution, nor can they truly transfer the natural right to preserve themselves from death. They may resist the immediate physical force of the executioner, not out of a challenge to the sovereign's right, but out of an inherent inability to surrender the instinct of self-preservation. This is a subtle but profound distinction. Ultimately, the obligation of subjects to their sovereign is understood to last only as long as, and no longer than, the power of that sovereign endures to protect them. Should the sovereign lose the capacity to provide security, the bond of allegiance is dissolved, and the subjects are free to seek protection elsewhere. In this framework, liberty is not an unbridled freedom, but a carefully defined space, existing within the necessary chains of law, and upheld by the fundamental, unyielding drive for self-preservation. Welcome back to our exploration of the Leviathan. In this chapter, we delve into the very health and sustenance of our artificial man, the Commonwealth, examining its nutrition and how it perpetuates itself. Just as a human body needs food, a Commonwealth requires materials for life: animals, plants, and minerals. While God provides these naturally, their ownership and, crucially, their distribution, fall entirely under the sovereign power. The sovereign, representing all subjects, is the ultimate proprietor of all land within their dominion. From this supreme ownership flows all individual property rights. A subject's right to hold land or commodities is granted by the sovereign, allowing them to exclude others, but always subject to the sovereign's will for peace and safety. Thus, the initial distribution of land is a sovereign act, assigning portions as the sovereign, not any individual, deems equitable and beneficial for the entire community. This ensures the collective good guides ownership. Beyond land, the sovereign also governs the distribution of all other commodities, both native and foreign. This is achieved through laws establishing markets, regulating transportation, and imposing duties on imports and exports, all designed to collectively profit and benefit the subjects. Once these materials are gathered, they must be processed and made readily available. This essential function is performed by money. Think of money as the very blood of the Commonwealth. Just as blood, distilled from nutrients, circulates through arteries to nourish every natural body part, money acts as the vital current in the body politic. It distributes throughout the Commonwealth, sustaining the entire structure. Without a sufficient and well-regulated money supply, a Commonwealth becomes weak and ailing, like a body deprived of blood. But with a healthy flow, it thrives, strong and vigorous. Money, as the universally accepted sign of value, enables movement and exchange across society. The sovereign holds the power to mint currency, stamp it with authority, and assign its value, ensuring this lifeblood flows efficiently for the common good. Finally, we turn to the procreation of the Commonwealth, its children. These are what we call plantations or colonies. In essence, they are smaller commonwealths, integral parts of the larger parent body that planted them, or from which they grew. When a commonwealth becomes so populous that its territory can no longer sustain its inhabitants, or when circumstances force people to seek new homes, colonies are established. These colonies are like children to the commonwealth that sent them forth. They derive their power and nourishment from the parent state, and, like children, are initially subject to its authority. They owe obedience to the commonwealth that created them, as long as they are unable to stand on their own. However, a natural progression occurs. Once a colony matures, becoming self-sufficient and capable of defending itself, it is no longer considered a child but rather a distinct, independent commonwealth. At this point, it is no longer bound by the absolute command of its original parent, aligning with the natural law that grown children, capable of self-provision, gain their freedom. This understanding of the Commonwealth's nutrition and procreation highlights the intricate design and the ultimate authority vested in the sovereign to ensure its health, growth, and enduring stability. Here, we delve into the intricate world of crimes, punishments, and the nuanced understanding of moral and legal transgressions as laid out by Hobbes. We explore the very foundation of justice within a commonwealth, distinguishing between what is merely a sin and what constitutes a crime punishable by the state. First, let us clarify a fundamental distinction: the difference between a sin and a crime. Hobbes explains that a sin is any transgression of a divine law, whether natural or civil. Every crime, by definition, is a sin, because all civil laws ultimately derive their authority from the natural law that commands us to keep our covenants, including the social contract itself. However, not every sin is a crime. A sin becomes a crime when it involves a deed or omission explicitly forbidden or commanded by the civil law of the Commonwealth. The key here is the action or inaction against an established civil law. Think of it this way: to merely have a wicked thought, such as coveting your neighbor's goods, is a sin in the eyes of God, a violation of natural law. But it does not become a crime until that thought manifests into an overt act, like stealing those goods. The state, the public authority, can only act upon what is outwardly discernible and explicitly defined by its laws. Therefore, a crime requires a law against it, and that law must be sufficiently declared to the people. No law, no crime. Furthermore, a crime is always committed with intent. It must proceed from the mind of the doer, meaning it is done voluntarily and purposefully. An action performed under irresistible force, or due to an unavoidable accident, where there was no intent or willful neglect, cannot be considered a crime. In such cases, the individual is not truly the author of the act in a moral or legal sense, and thus, should not be held responsible for it. This brings us to the concept of excuses and extenuations, which Hobbes meticulously details. An excuse, in his view, completely absolves a person of crime. For instance, if an act is done without any law prohibiting it, it cannot be a crime. Similarly, if the law was not sufficiently declared or known, or if the act was done out of pure accident or irresistible force, without any intention or negligence, then it is excused. A critical point Hobbes makes is that acts done under the immediate threat of death or serious injury, to preserve one's own life, can also be excused. This aligns with the fundamental natural right of self-preservation. Imagine a starving person stealing food to avoid immediate death. Hobbes suggests this could be excused, as the fear of death overrides the civil law in such extreme circumstances. Extenuations, however, are different. They do not excuse the crime entirely, but rather lessen its severity. An act might still be a crime, but the circumstances surrounding it make it less blameworthy. Hobbes identifies several such situations. One is when a person acts out of sudden passion such as anger, fear, or lust without forethought or malicious premeditation. For example, a spontaneous act of violence in the heat of an argument, while still a crime, might be considered less grievous than a planned assault. Another extenuating circumstance could be ignorance of fact. If someone commits an act that happens to be unlawful, but genuinely did not know the specific factual conditions that made it so, their crime might be extenuated. However, ignorance of the civil law itself, or ignorance of the sovereign power, is generally not an excuse, especially for those capable of reason, because everyone in a commonwealth is presumed to know the laws essential for peace and order. Now, let's turn our attention to the purpose of punishment. Hobbes's view on punishment is distinctly forward-looking and instrumental, rather than purely retaliatory. He defines punishment as an evil inflicted by public authority on him that hath done that which is judged a transgression of the law, to the end that the will of men may thereby be the better disposed to obedience. Notice the crucial phrase, to the end that the will of men may thereby be the better disposed to obedience. The primary goal of punishment is not revenge or retribution for the harm caused. It is not about an eye for an eye. Instead, its purpose is twofold. First, the correction or amendment of the offender, guiding them toward future obedience to the law, and second, to serve as an example to others, deterring them from similar transgressions. Punishment, therefore, is a tool for social control and the maintenance of order within the commonwealth. It must be inflicted by public authority, following a proper judgment, and its severity should be calibrated, not by the greatness of the past offense alone, but by its effectiveness in promoting future compliance. If the state merely sought revenge, it would be acting out of passion, similar to a private individual, rather than with the rational aim of preserving peace and order for all its subjects. In summary, Hobbes carefully constructs a framework where crimes are specific public transgressions against declared civil laws, committed with intent. Excuses can entirely remove culpability, often rooted in the fundamental right to self-preservation or lack of free will. Extenuations, on the other hand, acknowledge the crime but lessen its severity due to mitigating circumstances like sudden passion. And the overarching purpose of punishment is not retribution, but the strategic furtherance of obedience to the law, ensuring the stability and security of the Commonwealth for everyone. Welcome back to Leviathan. Today we delve into a chilling realm, one Thomas Hobbes names the kingdom of darkness. This isn't a place of physical shadows, but a dominion built on spiritual error and intellectual deception, a realm designed to mislead subjects and undermine the sovereign power. Hobbes argues that this kingdom of darkness draws its strength primarily from the cunning misinterpretation of Scripture. It thrives by twisting the true meaning of God's word to serve worldly ambitions. Consider, for instance, the notion of eternal life. Scripture speaks of resurrection and a future bodily existence, but the kingdom of darkness interprets this as an immediate, incorporeal survival of the soul after death. This idea, borrowed from pagan philosophy, suggests that our essence is not tied to our physical being, creating an imagined spiritual existence separate from the earthly commonwealth. Similarly, the concept of hell, which in Scripture refers to the grave or a future place of judgment for resurrected bodies, is refashioned into an everlasting torment for these disembodied souls. And excommunication, a church discipline, is presented as an eternal damnation, a loss of salvation itself. By instilling these fears and false beliefs, by making people believe their immortal souls are at stake, the architects of this darkness effectively elevate their own power, suggesting a spiritual jurisdiction that transcends any earthly authority. They create a phantom empire, promising salvation or damnation, based on obedience to their interpretations, not necessarily to God's explicit commands or the sovereign's laws. Furthermore, a significant pillar of this kingdom of darkness is what Hobbes terms demonology. This is the belief in and the manipulation of perceived evil spirits, ghosts, and invisible powers. Hobbes traces this insidious doctrine back to the ancient Gentiles, where priests used tales of gods and spirits, of portents and divinations, to gain sway over the populace. These pagan traditions, far from being purged, were unfortunately absorbed into Christian doctrine by ambitious clergy. Suddenly, devils, demons, and ghostly apparitions became central to theology, granting an immense, almost supernatural, authority to those who claimed to understand and control them. If priests could exorcise demons, or interpret omens, or bless and curse souls, they held a terrifying power over the common people. This belief in invisible, malevolent forces, and the supposed power of the church to mediate or command them, created a formidable counter-authority. It insinuated that the church held the keys not just to earthly morality, but to the very fabric of the spiritual world, and thus to a person's eternal fate. This manipulation through fear of invisible powers becomes the ultimate tool against the civil sovereign. When people are taught to fear eternal damnation more than any temporal punishment, their allegiance becomes divided. If a priest, claiming divine authority, declares that obeying the sovereign in a particular matter will lead to spiritual ruin, many will choose to defy their earthly ruler. The fear of God's wrath, as interpreted and wielded by the clergy, overrides the fear of the sovereign's sword. The kingdom of darkness thrives by fostering this intellectual blindness, by drawing subjects away from their primary duty of obedience to the established civil power. It teaches that there is a higher, spiritual law, administered by the church, which can nullify the laws of the land. In doing so, it introduces confusion, discord, and ultimately rebellion, all under the pious guise of serving God. Hobbes warns that such doctrines are not merely theological disputes, they are direct threats to the peace and stability of any commonwealth, creating a state within a state, where an imagined spiritual power continually undermines the very foundations of civil society. Having explored the foundational ideas of Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan, we now turn our attention to a practical application, a 7-day action plan designed to integrate Hobbesian logic into your personal quest for stability. This isn't about governing nations, but about understanding principles of order and security within your own life. We'll examine how clear thinking, structured routines, and conscious social agreements can lead to a more peaceful, productive existence, mirroring the escape from a chaotic state of nature into a well-ordered commonwealth. Let's begin with day 1 and 2, audit your language. Hobbes placed immense importance on the precise definition of words, arguing that much strife stems from ambiguous language. Think about it: how many disagreements, minor or major, trace back to people using the same words but meaning different things. For these 2 days, your task is to become acutely aware of the language you use and encounter. When you communicate, strive for absolute clarity. Define your terms. If you're discussing a successful outcome at work, what specifically does successful mean to you and your colleagues? If you speak of being responsible in a relationship, what exact actions and duties does that entail for each person? Actively listen for vague terms others use and, where appropriate, gently seek clarification. The goal is to minimize conflict arising from linguistic imprecision. By rigorously defining your terms, you build a common ground of understanding, much like a shared vocabulary, that prevents a war of words from escalating. This clear naming of things, as Hobbes suggested, is the first step towards rational discourse and a more harmonious environment, both internally and externally. Moving into day 3 and 4, we'll identify your personal state of nature areas and establish your own sovereign. Hobbes depicted the state of nature as utter chaos, a war of every man against every man, where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. This lack of a common power to enforce rules leads to pervasive fear. Now, let's translate this into your personal sphere. Where in your life do you experience consistent chaos, disorganization, or constant struggle? Is it your morning routine, financial management, workspace, or a challenging habit? These are your personal states of nature, areas where the absence of clear rules leads to internal conflict and lack of progress. Your task for these 2 days is to pinpoint these chaotic zones. Once identified, the next crucial step is to establish your sovereign a set of clear, non-negotiable rules or routines designed to bring order. For instance, if your mornings are chaotic, your sovereign might be a strict 6 a.m. wake-up time, followed by a predefined sequence of activities. If your finances are a mess, your sovereign could be a weekly budget review and automated savings. These rules, once established, act as your personal governing power, providing structure and security. They demand your obedience, but in return, promise to lift you out of the personal state of nature, replacing anxiety with predictability. By consciously creating and adhering to these internal laws, you build a more stable personal commonwealth. Finally, for day 5 through 7, we review your social contracts. In Hobbesian philosophy, individuals willingly surrender some absolute freedom to a sovereign power in exchange for peace and security. This is the essence of the social contract. For your personal life, think about the implicit or explicit agreements you have with others in relationships, at work, within your community, and even with yourself. These are your personal social contracts. Are you giving enough to get the security, peace, and benefits you need? Reflect on your key relationships. Are you contributing fairly to the shared household or team? Are you upholding your commitments? More importantly, are you receiving the expected peace, support, or order in return? If you find yourself consistently feeling insecure, unappreciated, or that chaos still reigns despite your efforts, it might be a sign that a particular social contract is unbalanced or undefined. Perhaps you're giving too much without adequate security or respect, leaving you vulnerable. Or perhaps you aren't upholding your end, thereby undermining the stability of the agreement. Use these 3 days to analyze these vital agreements. Consider initiating conversations where necessary to clarify expectations or renegotiate terms, much like citizens might petition their sovereign for better governance. The goal is to ensure your participation in these contracts yields the peace, stability, and mutual benefit that are the whole point of such agreements. This structured approach, inspired by Hobbes, helps you move deliberately towards a more stable, secure, and fulfilling existence. We spent time immersing ourselves in Thomas Hobbes' profound vision, detailed within his monumental work, Leviathan. Now, let's distill its essence into 3 critical takeaways, what we might call the Leviathan triad, the foundational pillars upon which his entire philosophy rests. First, and perhaps most famously, Hobbes asserts that the natural state of man is one of war and pervasive fear. Imagine a world without rules, laws, or a governing hand. Every individual in this raw condition possesses an unbridled right to everything, even another's body. Our inherent equality of ability, combined with resource scarcity, inevitably breeds competition, diffidence, and glory-seeking. Unconstrained self-preservation fuels constant struggle. Without a higher power, life becomes a battle of all against all. No industry, culture, or society flourishes, labor's fruits are never secure. Pervasive terror of violent death dominates. Life, as Hobbes states, is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, a powerful hypothetical revealing the essential need for governance. How then do we escape this bleak, terrifying cycle of fear? This brings us to the second critical takeaway: peace is only possible through a mutual social contract. Hobbes argues that while our passions drive conflict, our rational self-interest points to a solution. To preserve life and gain security, we surrender some absolute freedom. This contract is not with a ruler, but a covenant among individuals. Each agrees to lay down their natural right to all things, if others do likewise. It's a collective power transfer. Unrestrained liberty brings universal suffering. This mutual agreement, limiting actions under shared rules, forms civil society, the only path from perpetual war. An agreement alone, however rational, cannot guarantee lasting peace. This brings us to our third and most crucial point. The social contract demands absolute power for enforcement. No middle ground exists. As Hobbes famously states, covenants without the sword are but words, powerless to secure peace. The social contract, this crucial pooling of powers, must culminate in establishing a sovereign, the Leviathan, with unquestionable, absolute authority. Its power cannot be divided or limited, as any attempt breeds instability, factionalism, and regression to the state of nature. Hobbes insists there is no viable alternative between absolute sovereignty and anarchy. Divided power leads to disputes, weakened power to rebellion, dissolving peace. The sovereign must be the ultimate arbiter of justice, supreme commander, and final authority on all law and doctrine. Its power stems not from divine right, but from the governed's consent, given to escape the natural state's terror. Thus, Hobbes presents a stark choice: absolute power, even with some personal sacrifice, is the only bulwark against devastating life without government. It is the inescapable price of peace and order.